Alrighty. Oh wow. It's been a long time since I've sat at this table with a game set up and everything. At least alone. Divided Republic. So, I don't remember how much I said, but this was something that I wanted since I heard about it. You know, it intrigued me. I was afraid of Kickstarter. Just kind of like, well, how do I know what's going to come out of it? You know, if I look at what I'm used to, say a GMT game, I can kind of get a better idea about what it's going to come out like before I commit with my pre-order. And pre-orders are also a little less binding. They're sort of a, hey, I think I'd like to buy this, and I'm pretty sure I will. But then if I start to hear scary things about where it's going or something, I can run away from it. Kickstarter, you can't really do that. You're putting the money up. Anyway. This one, however, I had heard enough about it, and the designer had impressed me that I really did want to, but I didn't get around to it. And once I got to play it, I really, really liked it. Okay, so component-wise, the board, you know, it's kind of funny. I didn't notice these before, there's some markings here, but denting, some definite damage that came, I don't know, either in transit, shaking up, or during the packing or something. There's kind of places where it's kind of peeled away a little bit. It's a very pretty board, but it looks like maybe my thought was it got packed in a rush, but I'm seeing, you know, just indications of damage that might have been the shaking in transit. I don't know. Anyway, it didn't come with anything inside of it to protect it, obviously. Games seldom do. But whatever the material of the board is, seems to be a little bit more willing to be damaged than some. Also, regarding the components, now this was kind of cute, these little bags here. I've never seen this design before. It's really a flimsy bag, similar to what you'd see on a shrink wrap, basically. But it may be the first time I've seen cards come in a bag where I'm going to put them back in it afterwards, because it's efficient enough. Normally I put things back in sandwich bags, because the little Ziploc things, I'm always afraid I'm going to damage my cards putting them in this. These, I don't feel like I'm going to do that. I feel like a great little, you know, non-expensive, but clever solution to an issue that, I don't know, always has been kind of disturbing. You get a bunch of dice, one for each color. It's the kind of stuff that I guess you need to do to attract Kickstarter money or something, along with the little special things. These little cards are really kind of helpful. They give you most of the rules of the game on them, and then they give you your party special ability here. Just sort of a rules summary. And finally, there's the historical side on it. Very useful. And the historical is nice to read, because there isn't a lot of, in the rule book, there isn't a lot of historical background or anything. The rule book itself is a glossy, full color, not too distracting, but wide format. A lot of things I don't tend to like. So, you know, when I say, gee, I'm not sure it was the clearest possible, you could understand maybe it's my personal biases in here. And if you like glossy, wide columns that cover the entire page and a little bit of color, not much, then you shouldn't have a problem with it. One thing with the map that I noticed is over in the northeast, things got awfully crowded. Now, you can kind of pull them off and put them around the boxes, but unless you do that kind of uniformly, it gets confusing, and there was a piece stuck in Rhode Island that didn't really belong there. And this is something I noticed right away when I was playing it at the con as well, was we got to come up with, if we're going to put them off by the boxes, we got to put them always off by the boxes, because otherwise pieces are going to get lost. And in my solo game they did. I think they also did in that game. Lost in the sense that they're not, at least I can't quickly process what's going on. The cards, they've got kind of this funny cut element to them. They shuffle fine, and they're not too stiff or anything like that, and they're fairly sturdy. But they've got this kind of funny ridge on them that feels like they weren't cut absolutely perfectly. Minor complaint, no question, but they may not be as sturdy because of that. Another really minor issue, and I don't know if you can see this, but to me one of the first things I noticed is, wow, these are slightly different colored, and you might be able to tell something about the cards based on that. It seems like half the deck or something is one color and half is another, or it could be a spectrum running over the entire printing. I'm not sure, because that looks like a third color there. If that's the case, it's probably going to be really tough, but I could see it really getting to some people. I notice it, but then immediately say, well, I end up playing with cards that get all marked up and everything like that. They're nice in terms of attractiveness, in terms of functionality. They're fine, but when you start adding so much text, and some of the CDGs, most of them do this, it becomes kind of difficult until you're very, very familiar with the game, at which point, for me, I wouldn't probably want to play it much anymore. And not because of this game, but just I don't like playing something that many times. Anyway, where you have to read a lot of the cards to a large degree. I mean, there's a decent amount of text on some of these, and some of them aren't too bad at all, but some of them have kind of little throwaway phrases, etc. There's nothing to make them easier to read. There's also not a reminder on the polling to reshuffle the deck, which I hope is indeed the case here. That's how I played it. Regional polling. Looks like the components may have changed since the rules were written. At least a little bit. I see a reference to an appropriate polling card. I don't know. Somewhere or another it goes over when you reshuffle the deck, and I do believe. There we go. The deck is reshuffled after turns in which regional polls are played. Yeah, and some other cards played as events may call for a reshuffle. So, my feeling there is the regional polls should have had a reminder. And given that there's sort of this common element running through it all, making it a symbol might not have been a bad idea. There aren't a lot of symbols on these cards that wouldn't really cause a problem. Otherwise, I think they're pretty functional there. Now I've kind of left you in the dark while I'm doing this. What about the game itself? Well, obviously the topic really, really interests me. For me to have thought of this same kind of concept, and I don't know when Bogosi came up with it, but he had to have been working on it for quite some time beforehand. I don't want to put these away. Those are for me to come up with that concept as soon as I saw 1960, obviously this is something I wanted, and one thing with 1960 that I really like, though, is that it does a very good job of capturing sort of that individual election. Other games I have try to be generic about their election coverage and try to cover a whole, say, feel of a period of elections rather than focusing in on something so specific. And this one, too, is doing that very job. But here's the question I have with it, or the observation. When 1960 was a very, very up-in-the-air election. Almost every state was in play. I don't feel like that's the case in the 1860 election. Too many players, it seems, have a real ability to intervene and get themselves votes anywhere. Maybe they were all on the ballot, except for the Republicans in the Deep South. But their actual chances in the game seem too high. So, for example, the Southern Democrats, or any Democrats, to have a chance in, say, Massachusetts at this time seems inconceivable. And the game doesn't reflect that at all. We saw a Southern Democrat victory in Connecticut. That would have been impossible. In Maryland, maybe. But thus, the splitting of the Democratic Party more or less ensured that, and there's a card to trigger a movement between North and South, a card that maybe the Northern or Southern player would want to play. Probably other parties are less likely to play. There are certainly events that can help shape the history and the direction it's going. It's harder or easier, it's harder for the Southern Democrat to be in the Northeast. It's easier for bad events to happen to him there. But that doesn't mean it's not worth going there when there's an opportunity to slip in easily. Now, maybe more experienced players, people with a real feel for the game and an eye for what's going on, will be able to grab the states a little bit more efficiently than I managed to, so that there aren't these low-hanging fruit there for the Southern Democrats, say, to grab, or for the Republicans to grab that maybe they shouldn't have a shot at. Or whatever state, really. But it definitely gives this feel in the two playings that I've played, obviously, neither of them, with people who've played it a whole lot, except maybe the guy who was down one. Yeah. It was first game the other time, and this is my second game, so more than not a whole lot. Yeah, so I mean, everybody I've played it with, except for one person, has been an absolute novice, is I guess what I want to express there. And those kind of mistakes happen, those kind of, leaving something open and somebody slipping into it because, hey, everything I wanted's gone. Not having maybe figured out all the, strategic ideas behind placement, it's quite possible, though, that leaving things open isn't that bad an idea. In this game, I played very heavily for the lock states down, which I thought was my biggest mistake in the game I played before, where I felt like, I'll just go for states and, we'll see what happens. And, didn't really think about, I wanted to lock them down, but I didn't really understand completely how maybe. And now having the ability to look at the rules and set it up and play it on my own pace, I had a much better feel for that and was able to actually affect that strategy, but it didn't help much. Locking down states outside your region, which the Northern Democrats did, wasn't the key to victory if it ends up giving a decent amount of states to someone else, which kind of surprised me. I thought, ooh, the game's going to be historically, difficult enough that the Southern Democrats are going to have a hard time making it anywhere unless this works out the way it does. The Northern Democrats, as an example, so they should be quite powerful in New York State. Okay, I'm perfectly fine with the Republicans being able to trounce them in New York State. The Northern Democrats probably shouldn't be terribly powerful, again, in Massachusetts or Connecticut. But there isn't much differentiation there. And if you're going to fight in New York, there are times when that's going to overspill into some of the other states because of the way the regions work. So, and I guess what I'm kind of grasping at here is the mechanisms of a game do to some extent defeat the historicity. Although it's obvious that a tremendous effort was put in, to make this not just a light, fluffy remake of, say, 1960. There's a real attempt to ground it in the period. First of all, the four parties aspect, but also a lot of these cards having effects on you if you go into the wrong areas. But they become more kind of limiting risks rather than, it doesn't feel as natural as maybe it should to me. I guess that's kind of where it goes. It just, I like it, and I think it's to your advantage as a player to stay within your historic regions where you can. But when the opportunity arises, when you draw that governor's endorsement, yeah, you're going in there, and that's completely random. It really is. You could be getting a governor or senator's endorsement from places you have probably no right to be in. Does it make it more interesting? It certainly does as a game, because everything's in play, so that, you can still shift in. How about as history? Well, yes and no. I like a lot of variance and a lot of room for alteration, but here it feels just a little bit more random than I like. All the same, I definitely do like the game. I'm glad I picked it up. This is something that I think desperately needed to be done. And I don't think somebody else is going to take it and do another version of it, so this is the one we've got. It may not be the perfect simulation that I would have tried to create if I was energized enough to create something, but it's probably a better game than I would have tried to create. Leads me to another thought. What other elections would be terribly interesting? See, this one, I'm not sure it wasn't exactly a close election. What kind of comes to my mind is, say, the Truman-Dewey would be really a good one to do. Not really focused on this game, but on my conversation before with 1960. This would have been my first choice because this is such an interesting election. Another interesting one would be the Wilson Taft and Roosevelt, with that three-way dynamic going on. Of course, Roosevelt's just really a spoiler in it, but you never know. Could be interesting, as could some of the more modern ones. I mean, when you look at some of those. But what's interesting about those is they're very targeted to the swing state idea. And how much does that fit back to the older play? Because that's where it really gets interesting to me. In a presidential election, there's states that just aren't going to budge a different way in today's world. And that's kind of the question, how much was that true in earlier elections? Obviously, in a blowout election, they all kind of swing over. You see with Nixon or Reagan. But assume that it's fairly close. Assume that you've got someone who at least their own party accepts. Well, it's going to kind of cut a certain way, and there's just a few states that are in play. And how much is that the case across the board? You know, you had the Solid South in the in before 1960 for the Democrats, and you really wouldn't see many Republicans move there. The only question is, can you get a third party to, you know, damage that, as say Helms did or something. All right, I'm gonna send this one up because I'm just babbling about random shit as usual. But you know, I'm happy I picked this one up. I don't know how often I'm gonna get to play it because I got so many damn games. But definitely something I needed.